Welcome to another episode of Honors Spotlight, where we sit down with standout students and faculty from the MTSU Honors College to explore the research and creative work shaping our university community. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Alina Caldwell, an honors student whose thesis project brings together fashion design and one of the most iconic fantasy series of our time. Her creative thesis, Refashioning Fantasy, reimagines the costumes of HBO's Game of Thrones by looking back to the original source material, George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, and grounding her designs in realistic cultural, environmental, and historical influences. Across her project, Alina created fashion illustrations for 9 major families and regions in Westeros, exploring how color, landscape, climate, and cultural identity could shape what characters wear and why that matters for storytelling. We'll talk about the challenges of adapting fantasy to screen, the research behind world building, and what it means to translate a fictional culture into visual design. Welcome, Alina. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your major, your interest, and what drew you to the Honors College.
My name is Alina Caldwell. I'm a studio art major. I'm a junior and I'm working on my creative thesis. Part of the thing that drew me to the Honors College was a chance to work on a creative project as a thesis. I just thought that would be a cool way to explore my interest outside of studio art. I've always been interested in painting and creating art, but I've always kind of been drawn more to the illustrative side of it. I don't know, I think designing fashion illustrations, I don't know, it's a combination of my interest in art and also in fashion. Like, I've always liked to play dress up and stuff, so
Yeah.
it's okay. I play dress up every day when I get dressed, so.
How did you first become interested in costume design and the visual side of storytelling?
Well, like I said, I've always kind of liked dressing up, and I just think that fashion is such an interesting way to express yourself and communicate non-verbally something about yourself that you want to tell other people. But then also, I think what really drew me to this was how culturally and how sociological factors influence the way that we dress. Like we have to dress for the weather. So that can tell you something about where you're from, depending on how warmly you have to dress or how little you have to wear. And just like looking at different cultures and seeing how their different modes of expression kind of came about because of their geographical location was always.
Your project is titled Refashioning Fantasy. What inspired you to take on Game of Thrones specifically as the subject for your thesis?
Um, well, I was just kind of into Game of Thrones before this. I read and watched, I read the books and I watched the TV show. But I just remember watching the TV show and just thinking about how desaturated everything was. So kind of on my own, I was already thinking about different clothes I would put the characters in if I could. This could be a thesis. I could do something with this. I think specifically the way that they designed the Eastern cultures, I thought was a little concerning. They're at the beginning they have like a nomadic tribe of people. They're called the Dothraki. Um and I just thought the way that they dressed them was kind of like demeaning almost.
Like barely dressed?
Yeah, they're barely dressed, but they're running around, they're like fighting all the time, so it wouldn't make any sense. They're like on horses all day, like they're outside. They're gonna need a little bit more covering. I don't know. I just thought it was not like a good, or I didn't think that would be clothing that would naturally occur in that environment. I was like, I need to do something about this.
Yeah, there would be a lot of chafing happening.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the other problems with the costumes that you mentioned was the lack of color and visual variety, and my mind automatically thought of Bridgerton, which is very opposite and super colorful, and so I absolutely see where you're coming from. What do you see as the biggest missed opportunity in the show's costume design?
Well, I think for a show like Game of Thrones, where there's so many characters and there's so many different families and so many different storylines all happening at once, I think like color would be such a good way to differentiate what's happening on screen, especially because a lot of the actors kind of look similar sometimes. Like when I was first watching it, I could not tell the difference between like three like major characters, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. Having more visual variety would allow you to follow the story a little bit more, and it would be helpful in revealing aspects of the houses or the families themselves and kind of their reactions to situations, if that makes sense. Like their personalities and kind of what they value as a house or a family because they're so varied.
Oh, definitely. And why is color so important in a fantasy or historical setting? Like, what does it communicate to an audience?
With a show kind of based in the medieval times. I think now we take for granted color because dyes are so easily accessible and we can get a lot brighter colors. But back then, really the only people who were wearing super colorful garments were nobility and like rich people. So the colors that you wore really showed kind of your status, and having really rich colors directly reflected the amount of money that you had. So in Game of Thrones, I just felt that all the clothing was kind of dingy, honestly, and I just thought it was a real missed opportunity for you to be able to showcase, I don't know, the wealth of some of these houses.
Kind of like Hunger Games.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
So you did extensive research on geography, cultures, and the environments of Westeros. What was the most surprising thing you discovered while studying this world?
I don't know if anything was particularly surprising, but I was just kind of impressed with the amount of world building that went into creating this. Because basically, none of the questions that I had about a sociological condition that I'd need to research went unanswered. Like, there was an answer provided by George R.R. Martin. It was just a lot of work, I could tell, and it was impressive.
He did his homework.
He did his homework, that's true.
How did you approach connecting real world historical or cultural elements to the fictional cultures in A Song of Ice and Fire?
Well, I began by getting as much information on the fictional culture as I could, and then I would kind of cross-reference that with cultures that I knew existed in real life that had similar conditions. So, like, when I was researching northern cultures, I would look at places that had to deal with the cold and how different environments dealt with that. I was looking at for people who were living beyond the wall, traditional like castles or strongholds, they were kind of living in nature. I was looking at like Inuit cultures and Alaskan cultures basically, and then kind of moving more south but still in the north. I was looking at like Russian cultures and to an extent Irish and German. I just felt that there was a lot more to work with.
And that's a good segue into the design process. So, kind of walk us through that creative workflow from the mood boards that you did and the initial sketches and finally your final illustrations.
So I began with trying to have like a pretty good base of research that I can then make informed decisions about vibe wise, because the mood board creation process, that's where it gets really creative. So I would go on online, like on Pinterest or some other website kind of like that, and I would find images that I felt like evoked like the spirit of the costume that I was trying to create and like the feeling of the place or the family. And then from there, that would kind of form the creative basis for the costumes. And I could look at that and it would be like a visual reminder of the elements that I wanted to incorporate. And then I would go in and I'd find patterns and textures that I wanted to keep in mind when I was making the designs. And then some general silhouettes of things that I wanted to use. So like for one of them, for one of the families, I remember I was really into shoulder pads for them. I just thought it would be so cool. So I was looking at a lot of like 80s women's power suits, which sounds weird, but I don't know. I just had this vision in my head of making themselves look bigger almost.
Picturing Khaleesi with shoulder pads.
Yeah. I mean, that would have slayed. That's all I'm saying. Not really paying attention to necessarily the era that it's in. Like I tried to move kind of away from using just medieval stuff, and just looking at like silhouettes and general shapes that I wanted to keep in. And then I'd move on to like the actual sketching part. So
And you did this 9 different times for the different families and regions. What group was the most challenging to reinterpret and why?
The one that I found the most challenging was there's a group of people, they live on this place called the Iron Islands. So the house was House Greyjoy. But basically, their whole culture is they live by the sea. We're iron born, we're super tough. And fashion is de emphasized in their culture, but I still want, and they're poorer too. So it make getting really fancy with it a little bit more difficult. I think one of the problems with the actual costumes in Game of Thrones is that it underestimates humans' desire for ornamentation. So I wanted to still like clothing obviously kind of gives you status, but what do you do when there's a culture that values displays of status through fashion less? So that was kind of hard. And also they're like kind of Viking culture-esque. So I wanted them to have like a variety of clothing because they'd be picking stuff up from the different places that they go to. So just like consolidating all of that in my mind and like forming kind of a general look was a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I can easily see where they would have different bits and pieces that they would have
Yeah.
collected from
Yeah.
different battles along the way. Yeah. Which one was the most fun?
Well, I'm a fan of the North. So I like designing a bunch of their costumes. So House Stark's costumes were really fun to design because I was designing it while we had that big ice storm. I was really in the process of being like in the North. I was like, yes, snow, ice. That was pretty fun. And then another Northern culture that I thought was really fun was House Bolton because they're just like bad guys basically. So kind of communicating that visually. And then the Targaryens were fun to do just because they're so visually distinct.
And there's so few of them.
I know, there's so few of them. Yeah.
If you had to highlight one redesigned costume that best represents your vision, what would it be?
Probably the Targaryen one or the ones that I did for House Bolton. The Targaryen ones, I think that there's a lot like more research kind of going into that. For House Bolton, I just thought they were fun to design and I thought that I just had a good time doing it. And I got the spirit of what I was trying to evoke across.
Are there any design cliches in fantasy costuming that you wanted to avoid?
I find that nowadays it's moving a little bit away from this, but I think traditionally, when we think of, like, fantasy clothing, we think of I don't know, I think of, like, Tolkien and, like, Lord of the Rings, and then, like, the clothes that you see characters wearing in, like, D&D campaigns almost, and I wanted to move away from that because I think it's overplayed, and I think it also puts too much of an emphasis on Western European medieval age clothing. Because it's fantasy, you shouldn't have to stick to I'm staying in this era and I'm staying in this one specific one and it's going to influence the entire thing. I think moving across different places in the world, so like looking at Africa and Asia and Europe, and then looking at like those places across time gives you a wider berth of information to work with, but also just makes more interesting designs. I wanted to really make sure they did not look like they're in Lord of the Rings.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I keep thinking of like The Incredibles when she's no capes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I am actually pretty anti-cape in or cloak, I guess, in my design. So much fantasy design. I don't know, I feel like it's built on cliches, so it's a little bit difficult to work with, but yeah.
What skills did you develop through this project?
The ability to go back and revisit something and be like, "Okay, this is not working. What can I do to fix this?" Taking ideas that I had in my head and, like, actually translating them seems a lot easier when you say it out loud, but when you're actually doing it, it can be really difficult. I know for, the Night's Watch, they get compared to crows all the time, so I wanted to keep that element in there, but then when I actually went to go do the first sketches, I was like, "Actually, how am I gonna do this?" So I really had to, like, look back and think, "How would this silhouette appear naturally?" Getting in there and working out, like, "Okay, but where is this gonna fit into this? How are these sleeves attached?" All that kinda stuff.
It made you think, I guess, a lot more about how something would actually come to be versus here's this idea, make it happen kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah. I also had to kind of think about moving it away from, like, avant-garde fashion and, like, high fashion because people are still wearing this, like, they still have to be able to move around in this. The practicality aspect, I wanted to always keep that in there, but it's a little bit different when you're thinking about if something's gonna be practical in your head versus if someone's actually wearing this.
Oh yeah. Practicality is huge. I think of so many different video games where the women are barely wearing anything. And I'm like, they would not be able to fight in that.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Did working on this change how you watch the show or even what you experienced reading the book?
I actually had to stop watching the show because I was like, "I can't do this." It was so, like, visually unappealing to me that I just stopped watching it altogether.
The story wasn't enough to keep you there?
Well, it also kinda started to get bad, so I'm not gonna lie. So, I just stopped watching Game of Thrones altogether because it was making me too mad, and then, watching any TV show now, I've really started to pay attention to how each garment illustrates, like, the character's journey. Someone is designing all of these costumes, so it's very intentional. It's not just like you wake up and you put on clothes. There's someone who's sitting down and doing exactly what I was doing for everything. So even in like non-fantasy movies or television, like I was watching the movie Challengers. It's like a tennis movie and they're wearing athleisure all the time, but I was even noticing things like, oh, he's wearing something that's like a lot nicer than back then, and it's kind of just showing how a character evolves.
How do you hope that your project contributes to the broader conversation about adaptation or costume design?
In a perfect world, people would see my designs and be like, yes, we need to start putting more color into fantasy and historical dramas because that's been like a real trend recently is that the desaturation of history in general. I think it really does a disservice to people of the past, seeing them as people similar to us. Because like they were dressing up, they were wearing jewelry and all that, and they were trying to make themselves look good. I think, like, a lot of fantasy and historical television, especially, the color grading is just, like, brought down super low, so it's really desaturated looking, and I think it just makes for a boring viewing experience, and then it also just kinda makes it seem alien to us in such a colorful world, but there's, like, a lot of connections, and I think there's a lot of connections that you can learn from history.
Yeah, the color washing too. It reminds me of Twilight, where everything just seems so blue.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
it's kind of depressing a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank my thesis director, Tommy, in the theater department. He's been pretty helpful. And my other thesis director, Gina. I want to thank all my friends who have had to listen to me complain about their costumes too.
Where can listeners see your illustrations or follow your future creative work?
But I just made a Tumblr for my art. It's literally at Alina Caldwell, spelled just like how it's spelled in the title of the podcast, I'm assuming. I haven't posted anything there yet, but I was planning on posting all the finished designs and stuff in the process on there and probably posting other illustrations and things like that.
That wraps up today's episode of Honor Spotlight. A huge thank you to Alina Caldwell for sharing her creative vision and giving us a deeper look at the art and research behind costume design and fantasy storytelling. Her thesis, Refashioning Fantasy, is a reminder of how thoughtful design can reshape the way we understand characters, cultures, and entire worlds. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation with the students and faculty who are defining scholarship and creativity here in the MTSU Honors College. Thanks for listening, and join me next time as we continue shining a spotlight on the excellence within our honors community.